The issue with AI art is there's a controversy. AI art real, or is AI just a tool? And one of the definitions of art is that art is creating an interior human experience that some people would say can only come from humans. And that may not be the case. And then there's a fear that AI is going to replace people's jobs and artists' jobs in particular. And that may or may not be the case any more than photography replaced people's jobs. And the issue of AI is, or one of the criticisms of AI is that it's simply copying humans or plagiarizing humans' creative work. And AI art by itself can't be copyrighted. And the topic really is, what is art? And is it different than any other form of expression? And that art, defined loosely, is that it's a human activity that results in a product, which is a capitalistic way of looking at art that is an expression of a human and couldn't be created by a computer. And that art distinguishes itself from design, and that design has a functionality or a purpose where art only has to exist. And that designs have to solve some kind of problem where art is more of an expression that may not necessarily solve any problem. Designers tend to work with a purpose, and artists are expressing themselves with their instinct. And the expression is somewhat different, and although they're very similarly related. And then with regard to art versus science, that science is designed to be objective and guided by data or external data, where art is subjective and influenced by feelings, opinions, and interior experience. And in art versus science picks things that often can't be visualized or seen in a normal way. And so science has developed techniques to depict things that are normally unseen, but the intention of the scientific visualizations is both artistic, but it's also trying to be quantitative and scientifically accurate and showing things that you might not otherwise be able to visualize. And an example of this is visualizing information that has come from electron microscopy and other that can be seen by the normal eye, but it gives you a sense of what depiction of what's actually going on, in this case, inside a cell, where these are atoms, molecules, and arranged into structures that are the inner workings of a cell. And it's intended to be aesthetically pleasing, but it's also intended to be scientifically accurate, where how a molecule binds on a protein or how a microtubule is assembled, that these are things that you can't really see with a microscope, but it gives you a sense of how they operate in a visual space that is a way of sort of scientifically depicting something that isn't necessarily art by itself, that it's meant to be quantitative, as well as giving you a feel of we're there. And the sense of art, as we talk about it, is that it's depicting a feeling or an interior feeling that you'll get from what the artist intended, or maybe related to what the artist intended, that is conveying an interior experience from the artist to the viewer, the observer, and that it's conveying not just a simple feeling, but sometimes a very complex feeling, and that it's an interior experience that is uniquely human in that you're feeling it and the artist intended you to feel it, and that you may not feel what they intended, but you feel something. And the open issue is, can AI do that or not? And that a scientist or a historian can tell you what happened but an artistic, like a novelist, can express to you what it felt like. And this is related to the limbic resonance concept, where the artist is generating an image or a creation based on their interior feeling. And hopefully you're feeling something related to what they were feeling. And that resonance is an amorphous thing that a human artist might create that an AI artist might not be able to, but that's a little unclear at this stage. And art doesn't have to be a picture, it can be music, and it doesn't have to be a limbic resonance between humans. It can be a feeling that's conveyed between creatures through sound, for example, with music. And artist doesn't have to be, or often it's best not to be explicitly realistic, in that it's an impression of what the artist was feeling, and or an impression that impresses upon you what you might feel when you're looking at something. And so it's generally familiar, but it's not precisely accurate like an architectural type drawing. And then it doesn't have to be very realistic at all, where a surrealistic art is something that isn't possible in physical reality, but it still conveys the essence of what the mood or the feeling or what's trying to be communicated is. And it can be quite like a nightmare sort of feeling, where trying to visually express feelings that are good or bad, and that explore the concepts of those, where it's painted over time, you're looking at it over time, and you get different messages of it over time. And those messages are coming from the interior of a person and what they were thinking at the time they created the art. And then art doesn't have to be serious in so many ways. This was a piece of art shown not long ago at a art show that was sold for $120,000, I believe, which was a creative work. And then people thought that was outrageous. But then in the art community, there's the expression of the art, not just in the physical form or a product, but an expression of the art that might be captured on video of performance-related art.
Hungry artist.
And in this case, not the original artist, but a different artist went to the art performance, and the artist is ephemeral. It's not necessarily a permanent. The different artist, as a form of artistic expression, takes the first artist's work and eats it, evidently. And
in the same way that as the artist put the banana on the wall, he say, "I'm coming here to eat the banana. That's my performance."
Give them a second.
So that was the original artist watching the performance artist.
Yes.
He was not arrested, but we asked him to leave the booth and to leave the fair, and we have his contact and everything, so we can go further, but I don't think we will.
Can you count? 10, 9,
And so the art also doesn't have to be in a gallery. It's the artist Banksy is quite famous for doing graffiti that is in the form of art that is blending both the architecture and a new creative statement on top of that, and is a kind of performance art that finds itself in controversial circumstances, with people painting over it and people painting on top of it, and he tends to become increasingly recognizable around the world, but he also has a performance element to his work. So this frame was designed to shred the art piece in the middle of the auction, unbeknownst to the people who were attending the auction. And the art was to shock people as to the value of art, somebody had just bought it for $860,000, and likely the pieces were worth more after than before. They stopped it halfway through, so it was halfway shredded, the purchased artwork, and I don't know what happened after that. I think the buyer got to keep the half shredded piece, and which made it even more unusual. So art overlaps life in other forms of expression, including politics. And recently, a former president was arrested and was booked into custody and had his mugshot taken in the news. And he posed in an unusual way for a mugshot, but he almost immediately put out a product line of his mugshot on a series of T-shirts for fundraising purposes and with a political message on it. And this one is controversial in that other people have been putting out T-shirts and memorabilia with the mugshot on it. But it turns out that the mugshot belongs to the government and doesn't belong to the person in the picture. And they don't have the copyright to take that image and use it for commercial purposes. And so this has turned into another level of controversy as to, was this even legal, allowed to do this? And so these circumstances where you have an original expression of art or image, and what happens to it afterwards is a form of art, an expression. And these are humans playing together in various ways, but art is not just a product or a thing, it's an experience. And that it's a reflection of what it means to be human in the end. And that's what distinguishes art from design or from a picture or something like that, is your feelings about it and evoking kind of the limbic resonance between the creator and the observer is the important element. And these are not unique to humans. That in the case of, for example, beavers, is a beaver building a dam, is that considered art, or is that considered a biological function of creation for survival? Or a spider weaving a web, is that art, or is that just their house or something else? And the process of creation is intrinsically biological, where if you give, for example, the spider drugs, the way that it will create the art is different depending on which drug it was given. And so is this part of the creative process, or is this the element that makes it biological and not mechanical, or what is that? For humans, before humans in Homo erectus, the oldest art they've found record of is a shell that was roughly 500,000 years old with scratches on it that they think might have been jewelry. Over 100,000 years ago, people would make jewelry out of the talons of eagles that they caught and other sorts of things, sort of an expression across time of their feeling, and maybe an expression that would, if you're wearing this jewelry, it conveys some sort of other feeling about you. Art that is your communication across time, the early equivalents of recording, for example, is cave painting, where here's examples from 16,000 or 9,000 years ago of messages that people left for others to not necessarily view at the same time, but at some future time. So communicating across time and across space, in a sense. In the case of architecture apparently is unique, that the people are making this in a certain style, but that particular style is repeated a dozen times around the world in different cultures on different continents. And so there's something about that style that was intrinsically human at the time, that they felt the need to go through all the effort to build these pyramids for whatever purpose is unclear, but they evoke a feeling, and a similar feeling in humans in multiple locations. Other forms of art that may have been design or may have been art, the Stonehenge, which was built over a period of 1,000 years. And so it wasn't a single form of expression. It was something that was communicating across time and perhaps had a astronomical purpose, but it was also an expression of creative work in a way. And architecture continues in that way, that trying to convey feelings of emotion or limbic felt sense of what the architecture means beyond just functionality. And then expressing the self in art. Last time we talked about the self, and the self is something that has changed over time, where these are expressions of self that are intended for other people to view at a different time. And a sense of what is a self-portrait or a selfie or a self-depiction is something that's intrinsically human, but also it's changing, it's evolving continuously. A selfie now is your phone picture of you, but future selfies are animated or TikTok videos, or even yourself conveyed into an AI that is given an animated avatar that is given a personality and like an offspring or like a child that is you or your representative or your ambassador to the world, that can go to different locations across space and to different times across time. So it's your selfie can become more autonomous and elaborate that we've talked about. And that then these concepts of AI and arts also bring into the topic of who owns it and what does it mean to own something like this. And in the last 1,000 years, or really 100 years, has the legal concept of copyright, which is to own something longer than your lifetime. In that copyright is a legal structure that's evolved similarly in different countries, but it's something that you create during your lifetime, which used to be that you owned it during your lifetime. And then the concept of your ownership of it extended beyond your lifetime to your inheritance. And so copyright is the legal structure that recognizes that you should be able to own something. And in recent years, this has been pushed to try and extend that, where Disney has been at the front lines of trying to extend copyright beyond, I believe it's 70 years past the lifetime of the artist. And Disney himself didn't even draw Mickey Mouse, which is the front lines of their dispute. And Mickey Mouse copyright recently expired, in that 70 years past its creation. And elements of it are drifting into the public domain, but it's a little unclear exactly what elements and what is the copyright, and these are fought over. But it's this concept that the creation survives longer than the creator and is owned as a piece of property or a product, which is the capitalistic part of it. And then in performance art is that owning that the fact that you did the performance or the recording of it or the remix of the recording of it, that these things continue on to have a life of their own. And the other element of copyright is, as a legal framework, is that the copyright has to be human created, in that this is a monkey who is relatively famous in that a photographer, a nature photographer, set up his camera with the tripod and all of the things in the jungle and went away for a snack or something. And the monkey came and clicked the button and took his own picture. And so this was a picture created by a non-human. And it's been fought over in the courts, but it was finally ruled that this photograph cannot be copyrighted because it was not created by a human, which is an interesting legal precedent. And they're not suggesting that it can be created or owned by a monkey, but they're saying that for something to be copyright under the law, it has to be created by a human intentionally. And so a similar argument is going on about AI-generated work, is that the current legal precedent is that absent the human hand guiding it to do it. It's not protected by copyrights. Artwork created by AI, even if it was initially prompted by the AI, is not protected by copyright, where the law is particularly protecting things that are of human origin or human created. But that's a gray area where if you wrote the program that made the art and so on, so that's yet to be played out. So to summarize, that the artist is creating an interior feeling in you as the recipient of the art. And in a way, it's synchronizing brains across time and distance in a limbic resonance way, in the same way that touch does in same time, same place. This allows this synchronizing of feelings across time and place. And this can be done with music and dance and many modalities, but it's a limbic call and response, or a dance between limbic systems of humans. And whether AI will be able to play in that dance is yet to be seen. I'm of the assumption that it will. And so this dance of interaction between humans comes into the discussion of flow and the theory of flow. And that one of the theories of flow and getting into a flow state, either as an artist who's creating or as a recipient, but especially as the artists, the musicians and painters and writers often get into flow states. And one of the original Csikszentmihalyi's theory of flow is that flow is something that happens when you have a risk of death. And when you're painting a painting, you have to, and you get into a flow state, well, you have to ask, where is the risk of death in that action? And that risk of death is creating an artistic piece that is emotionally impactful to others, but it's risky in that if it's so emotionally impactful that they decide you're an evil artist or a bad musician, and they evict you from the tribe because your creation was touching a nerve too deeply inside them, then the tribe will reject you and banish you from the tribe, which in earlier civilizations was essentially a death sentence, where if you're kicked out, maybe you are dead to that tribe, but if many times people could not survive on their own very long. And so the risk of death in creative expression of art is being a little bit too obnoxious. Like when the guy ate the banana art, would he be attacked physically? Would he be kicked out of the art exhibit, which he was? Would he be shunned from future creative work? And part of the thrill of creating art is the risk of the harm that might come from that. And so that risk of death is at play there. And then for something to be humorous, it has to have a little bit of that risk of offense. And things that are humorous today will be boring in the future, and things that were humorous or dangerous in the past are passé and less interesting today. And so it can extend to your choice of how to live your life. Do you live your life as an artist, where it's just creating things at the edge of humor or offending people or taking risks or creating new things that aren't boring and they're not lethal? They're somewhere in between. And that's a lot of artists live with their life as an expression of art. And this topic of mandalas is in that sense, where the depiction of your mandala of your life, is it a form of artistic expression, or did you play it safe, or did you take some risks, or some combination of those? And how did that turn out? And so from the sense of being interior to the essence of a person, is art, does it need a soul to be considered art? Is it some entity that is intrinsically human, that in order to do art, do you need to have that? And if AI doesn't have a soul, can AI ever create art? And is it the creation, or is there something that's limiting it back? And in a sort of a pantheism way to look at it, that everything has somewhat of a soul. And so AI maybe has a primitive soul now, but it can evolve one. And thus, to get to the artificial general intelligence, to where the AI can actually create art and dance that line between too dangerous and too boring, is that what we call intelligence? And is that the element that's still not very clear in AI, but getting there? And is that the element that's necessary to get to human expressions like love or things like, can an AI love like a person and vice versa? And we're dancing on that border. People love their cars, they love their boats, they love their shoes, whatever. But does the boat and the car love them back? As they get smarter and smarter, are they going to become more human and develop more of a soul? And so it's the boundary of where AI is and where it's going. And so that's some thoughts to think about that we're traveling through a territory that isn't clear, but it seems to be evolving towards AI becoming another life form that has potentially a soul and can interact with us in these ways. So that's some thoughts to discuss.